Helen Carmichael moved around her kitchen with a mixture of nervous energy and anticipation. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of freshly baked bread. She had spent the afternoon carefully planning every detail of the dinner, setting the table with the fine china she rarely used and folding the napkins with precision. Her son, Ethan, had called earlier, inviting his friend Malik over for the evening, and though she wanted to appear calm, Helen felt a subtle flutter of curiosity she hadn't experienced in a long time. Ethan's voice on the phone had been casual, cheerful. "Hey, Mom, Malik's free tonight. Can he come over for dinner?" he had asked. Helen remembered nodding even though he couldn't see her, feeling a little thrill at the idea of someone new in their home. Malik was African, a student friend of Ethan's from college, and Helen had never met him before. There was nothing unusual about it. She liked to host, but something about this invitation made her pulse quicken, a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness she tried to push aside. By the time Ethan arrived home, Helen had already finished preparing the meal. The table was set perfectly, with soft candlelight flickering in the center. Ethan walked in, carrying a small backpack, and immediately began chatting about his day, his energy infectious. Helen smiled at him, grateful for the normalcy he brought. She could almost forget the subtle tension she felt in anticipation of meeting Malik, yet every sound from outside, the crunch of tires on the driveway, the distant laughter of neighbors, made her more aware that the evening might not be as ordinary as she had expected. When Malik arrived, he stepped into the living room with an easy, polite confidence. His presence was commanding but not overbearing, and Helen couldn't help noticing the way he carried himself, the calm smile he offered as he shook her hand. "It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Carmichael," he said, his voice warm and genuine. Helen felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest, a mix of politeness and something deeper, more instinctive, that she quickly tried to dismiss. Ethan's face lit up, happy to see his friend, and Helen excused herself briefly to grab drinks from the kitchen, telling herself she was just being hospitable. The dinner began with polite conversation, as Helen had imagined it would. Ethan and Malik spoke about college, classes, and shared interests while Helen listened, occasionally chiming in with questions about Malik's background and studies. She found herself laughing more than usual, her voice lighter than it had been in months. There was something effortless about Malik's manner, the way he made conversation flow without trying, and Helen found herself leaning in slightly when he spoke, absorbing the sound of his voice in a way that felt both comforting and exhilarating. As the meal progressed, Helen noticed small moments that seemed to linger longer than they should. A shared laugh over a story Ethan recounted, the way Malik's eyes met hers for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary, the casual brush of his hand against the edge of the table, each gesture seemed amplified in her awareness. She told herself repeatedly that she was imagining things, that it was natural to be curious about someone new, yet the flutter in her chest refused to settle. After dinner, Ethan got up to clear some dishes, leaving Helen and Malik alone at the table. The conversation shifted subtly, from general topics to more personal stories. Malik mentioned his family, his aspirations, and Helen found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She spoke of her own experiences, the quiet moments of loneliness that often filled her home when Ethan was at college, the subtle regrets she carried from choices she had made in the past. Malik listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expressions careful but kind. Helen felt seen in a way she hadn't realized she had missed. Malik's presence was soothing, yet it carried a tension Helen couldn't ignore. Every time he laughed at a story she shared, every time he responded with understanding rather than judgment, she felt an internal pull she didn't fully understand. It was not about desire, at least not in the obvious sense, it was about connection, the simple human craving to be understood, acknowledged, and appreciated. Helen found herself leaning closer unconsciously, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, heart beating faster with every exchange. Ethan returned with a tray of dessert, breaking the quiet tension with casual jokes and comments. Helen smiled at him, feeling a mix of guilt and amusement. She could see the innocence in his expression, completely unaware of the subtle shift that had occurred in the room during his brief absence. Malik excused himself politely after finishing his dessert, standing to gather his coat. Helen felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Was it longing, curiosity, or simply the awareness of her own emotional vulnerability? She watched him leave, a polite wave exchanged at the doorway, and felt the quiet stillness settle over the house once more. Left alone, Helen walked slowly to the window, gazing out at the quiet suburban street. The candlelight from the dining table flickered, casting gentle shadows that seemed to echo the thoughts racing through her mind. She thought about the evening, the laughter, the stories, the ease of conversation, and realized she had felt a spark of something she had almost forgotten existed. It was not merely attraction, it was awareness, recognition, the realization that emotional connections could still surprise her even after years of routine and solitude. As she turned back to tidy the last few dishes, Helen's thoughts drifted to Ethan and Malik, to the fleeting moments of connection that had marked the evening. She reminded herself that the feelings she experienced were complex and human, that there was no wrongdoing in noticing someone's warmth or charm. And yet, she couldn't deny the subtle thrill, the small tension that lingered long after the door had closed. The night was calm, the house quiet, but Helen's mind hummed with the awareness that life could still present unexpected moments, moments that might challenge her understanding of herself and the boundaries she had carefully maintained. The next morning, Ethan woke to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the curtains. He stretched and yawned, feeling both rested and slightly anxious about what the day might bring. Vanessa had already started preparing breakfast when he stepped into the kitchen. The smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee filled the room, making the space feel even warmer and more inviting. "Good morning, Ethan," Vanessa said with a smile, her voice calm and comforting. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," he replied, returning her smile, a little shyly. He noticed the gentle way she moved around the kitchen, the ease with which she handled the pans and dishes, and couldn't help but admire her grace. Vanessa caught his gaze and looked away quickly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks, as though she, too, felt the subtle electricity that lingered between them. Breakfast was a quiet, comfortable affair. They shared stories of their childhoods, their hobbies, and their dreams. Ethan laughed more freely than he had the day before, encouraged by Vanessa's easy warmth. Vanessa, in turn, found herself fascinated by his curiosity, the way he noticed small details, and the earnest way he asked questions. Each passing moment seemed to draw them closer, their conversations weaving a delicate thread of connection. After breakfast, Vanessa suggested showing Ethan the town. "There are a few places you might like to see," she said. "The park, the library, and the little market down the street." Ethan agreed eagerly, and they set out together. The walk was leisurely, giving them the chance to talk and share quiet smiles. Sometimes their hands brushed against each other by accident, sending small shocks of awareness through them both. Each touch lingered just a moment too long, yet neither said anything. At the park, Ethan watched Vanessa interact with people they passed, neighbors, shopkeepers, and even a few children. Her kindness and confidence impressed him, and he felt a mixture of admiration and a strange, unfamiliar longing. Vanessa noticed his gaze and felt her own pulse quicken slightly, aware of the subtle attraction growing between them. She told herself it was nothing, just the natural warmth of companionship, yet she couldn't ignore the way her thoughts lingered on him after each shared smile or word. In the late afternoon, rain began to fall softly, sending them both running for shelter under the awning of a small cafe. Inside, they ordered hot drinks and found a quiet corner, the cozy atmosphere amplifying the closeness they already felt. The sound of rain tapping against the windows created a rhythmic backdrop, almost like a heartbeat that matched the tension in the room. They sat side by side, their knees occasionally brushing, a warmth spreading through them that neither fully understood. Vanessa suggested they play a board game she kept on a nearby shelf, just to pass the time. Ethan agreed, and as they played, their laughter filled the room. Occasionally, Vanessa would reach across the board to move a piece, their hands briefly touching. Each touch sent a small jolt of awareness through both of them, and the room seemed charged with a quiet energy. Ethan's eyes met hers, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. He wanted to say something, anything, to acknowledge the feeling, but words failed him. Vanessa felt the same hesitation, caught between restraint and desire. As the rain slowed, they returned home, dripping slightly from the remaining drops. Vanessa suggested drying off with warm towels, and the simple act of helping each other brought a new closeness. Ethan's hand brushed Vanessa's as she handed him a towel, and they both lingered just a second too long, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The small gestures, the shared smiles, and the easy comfort of one another's presence had woven a tension that neither could deny. Evening came, and they found themselves in the living room once more, sitting near the fireplace. The flames flickered, casting shadows on the walls, and the warmth of the fire seemed to echo the warmth growing between them. Vanessa offered Ethan a blanket, draping it over his shoulders, and their fingers brushed as she adjusted it. Both of them felt the jolt of electricity, a mix of curiosity and desire that neither wanted to name out loud. Vanessa suggested a quiet moment, just sitting together, listening to music, letting the day's conversation settle. Ethan leaned back, feeling the comfort of her presence, and Vanessa felt a protective warmth toward him that was complicated by a new, unexpected attraction. They sat in silence, yet it was a silence filled with unspoken words, glances, and gentle movements that deepened the emotional intimacy. As the night deepened, Vanessa showed Ethan to his room again. He paused at the doorway, looking back at her with a mixture of admiration and something unspoken. "Good night, Vanessa," he said softly. "Good night, Ethan," she replied, her voice carrying the faint tremor of emotions she tried to hide. Alone, both of them reflected on the day, the laughter, the closeness, and the subtle touches that lingered in their memories. The attraction was undeniable, yet wrapped in the comfort of trust and care, creating a tension that neither wanted to confront too soon. The room was quiet, but both hearts were full of thoughts and feelings that promised a night of emotional awakening yet to come. The morning sunlight spilled across Lila's small apartment, slipping through the curtains and brushing against her desk scattered with notebooks, pens, and remnants of last night's hurried coffee. She sat for a few moments, sipping from a mug that had grown cold, her mind replaying every detail of the previous evening. The city outside was alive, but inside, she felt a strange quiet, a space where anticipation and apprehension tangled together. The memory of Ethan and Malik's casual smiles, their easy conversation, and the confidence with which they had offered her a job without an interview, kept surfacing. She told herself it was just excitement, a thrill of the unexpected, but deep down, there was something else, a tension she couldn't quite name. By mid-morning, she found herself dressed and ready. The office had said they would pick her up for the mountain outing later that day. She had packed lightly, a small backpack with essentials, a notebook tucked inside for planning, and her camera, more out of habit than intention. Her heartbeat quickened as she waited outside the apartment, glancing down the street for the sleek black car they had arrived in yesterday. When it pulled up, she noticed how naturally it seemed to belong in the busy traffic, how Ethan and Malik stepped out with calm assurance. "Good morning, Lila," Ethan said, his smile easy and warm. Malik gave a brief nod, his eyes sharp and observant, scanning the surroundings. Lila felt a subtle thrill at the attention, yet she reminded herself to remain composed. The drive toward the mountains was quiet at first, punctuated by soft music and the occasional glance from Ethan toward Lila. The city gradually faded behind them, replaced by winding roads, clusters of trees, and distant hills that shimmered with early autumn colors. Lila watched as the scenery shifted, feeling the tension inside her loosen just a little. Malik spoke first, his voice calm and measured. "I hope you're comfortable with this pace. We like to take things slowly, see the places before rushing through them." Lila nodded, unsure what to say, but intrigued by the way his words seemed to carry meaning beyond the surface. There was something in the way they both operated, a balance of subtle guidance and unspoken expectation, that made her feel simultaneously reassured and alert. She couldn't put her finger on why she felt so drawn to their company, yet so cautious. The mountains appeared gradually, rolling into view like a secret waiting to be discovered. They stopped briefly at a small cafe tucked along a winding path, the kind with a wooden deck overlooking a gentle stream. Steam rose from coffee cups, and a few locals were scattered at tables, laughing softly, enjoying the crisp air. Lila followed Ethan and Malik onto the deck, her senses alert to every detail, the sound of running water, the scent of pine, the warmth of sunlight filtered through the trees. Ethan gestured to a table with a view. "Sit here," he said. "We like to enjoy the scenery as much as the conversation." Malik placed a hand briefly on the chair beside Lila, not intrusive, just guiding. She felt a ripple of awareness at the touch, a subtle reminder of the strange intimacy of the day. As they settled, they ordered drinks, and conversation flowed. They asked about her childhood, the small town she had grown up in, her favorite books, and the dreams she had shelved for practicality's sake. Lila found herself opening up in a way she hadn't expected. She was conscious of their attentive listening, the way Ethan's eyes would flicker to her gestures, and how Malik seemed to notice even the slightest change in her posture or tone. It was flattering, even intoxicating, but also made her keenly aware of the boundaries she needed to maintain. "You've been through a lot already, haven't you?" Ethan said gently, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Lila hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I suppose, yes. But I've learned a lot. Life doesn't always go the way we plan, does it?" Malik nodded, as if reading between the lines of her words. "No, it rarely does. But sometimes, unexpected detours lead to experiences we never imagined." The subtle tension in the conversation grew, not uncomfortable, but electric in its quiet way. Lila could feel it, a mix of curiosity, caution, and something akin to excitement. They laughed at small jokes, shared stories from their own pasts, and yet, there was an undercurrent, an awareness that each was testing limits, gauging reactions. Lila's mind wandered briefly, imagining what this kind of attention might feel like in other circumstances, but she quickly pulled herself back, reminding herself of her goals and the new job she was stepping into. She could enjoy the company, appreciate the experience, without letting herself cross lines she knew she couldn't return from. The mountains, the gentle breeze, and the quiet murmur of the cafe all combined to create a sense of surreal calm. It was almost too peaceful, and she knew it, as though the serenity itself was a test of her focus. As the afternoon wore on, they continued up winding trails, stopping at small overlooks to admire the distant peaks. Lila's steps were careful, her camera in hand, capturing the landscape while also documenting her own perspective of the day. Ethan and Malik walked beside her, discussing details about the office in the most casual way, blending professional advice with stories of their own experiences. It was strange. She felt as if she were being invited into a world both professional and personal, a delicate balance that made her heart beat a little faster. There were moments when Ethan's hand brushed lightly against hers while handing her a notebook, or when Malik's voice lingered a moment longer than necessary in conversation, and Lila noticed, her thoughts splitting between exhilaration and caution. It was a new sensation, being seen and noticed in ways that were flattering, yet required careful self-awareness. By late afternoon, they stopped at a quiet spot overlooking a valley, the sun dipping low and casting long shadows. Lila sat on a rock, taking a deep breath, letting the wind carry her thoughts away. Ethan and Malik stayed nearby, respectful of her space, yet close enough that the presence of two attentive adults was undeniable. "You're handling all of this very well," Ethan said softly. "It's not easy to navigate new environments, especially when there's so much happening at once." Lila smiled faintly. "I'm learning," she admitted. "I guess that's all we can do, keep learning." Malik gave a subtle nod, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "And sometimes, learning isn't just about the place or the task. It's about understanding yourself in the process." The ride back to the city was quieter than the morning, filled with soft reflections and moments of silence that weren't uncomfortable but felt charged with the unspoken awareness of the day's events. Lila sat back in the car seat, hands folded on her lap, pondering the experience. She had enjoyed the outing immensely, appreciated the attention and subtle challenges, but also felt the weight of responsibility to maintain her boundaries. As the city lights reappeared in the distance, Lila realized how much the day had changed her perception, not just of the job or the men she had met, but of herself. She felt more aware of her emotions, more in tune with her instincts, and surprisingly confident in her ability to navigate unfamiliar territory. It was a lesson wrapped in an unexpected adventure, a day she wouldn't soon forget. When they dropped her off at her apartment, Lila thanked them quietly, stepping out of the car with a mixture of relief and lingering anticipation. She watched them drive away, the black vehicle disappearing into the night traffic, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She leaned against the door, heart still racing, reflecting on the day's events. The mountains, the cafe, the quiet challenges, they all combined into a complex tapestry of emotions she was only beginning to understand. For Lila, the outing had been more than a scenic journey. It had been a lesson in perception, in awareness, and in navigating the delicate line between fascination and caution. As she entered her apartment, closing the door behind her, she knew that tomorrow would bring new experiences, but she also knew one thing: she was beginning to understand the power of observation, patience, and the subtle art of maintaining boundaries, even when the world seemed intent on testing them.